Thanks for watching. My name's Chris Summer, and this morning I'm going to do a session on this urchin, focusing on the sort of soft out of focus section. And it's really important in my work to have that soft blurry part. It really helps the details sort of jump off the page. One of the things often that I see with realism work is that without changing brushes and without sort of softening paints and creating layers, is the work can be so sharp. People are so good at creating detail and creating the element of detail and sharpness that actually it has a contradictory effect, and it makes the image look flat because there's no depth to it on the paper. So one of the ways that I create that depth is with a soft out of focus section, which I do in my feathers and my urchins. I've also done videos before about the tone of my paint, especially on my Instagram, I think, particularly with the sort of bits that I want to recede, that I'll use a slightly cooler tone of greys, and with the focus section, which I haven't worked on yet, I put a bit of burnt umber or burnt sienna in there, and that'll just lift that off the page. So these are the brushes that I'm going to be using, or that I sort of use for this section. This is a 1/8 flat. Actually, I won't be using this one because this is a little big. This is a 3/0 round. I think that's a 5/0 round. That's a 10/0 round. And these are all old brushes, so you can see that they're splayed and worn and frayed out, and that means that it's easy to avoid sharp edges. The last thing you want in a soft area is a sharp edge of paint, and to save going around softening all those edges if you use an old brush. So these two brushes here, they're actually the same brush. Just one's new, one's old. And so I use the old one for the softer parts. And so basically what I do is, as work comes in from out of focus into focus, obviously my brush changes so that it's still soft, but it's getting finer so that I can achieve a little bit more complexity in there. So that's why this one will sit in here in the process as I move down. Even though it's larger, just because it's sharper, because it's new. And then this one is my 20/0, and that's what I use on the fine detail, which I won't be using today at all. In fact, I won't even be using that one either. So this is my setup as I have it. I've got the floating table here, and I've got my reference, and this is my work. So I'll zoom in a bit in a second, but you can see that this section is kind of finished. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to work across the top here. So this is my base layer. When I do the softer sections, I tend to do more layers than in the detail section, because to create that softness, like when I block in, that's just about keeping the form. I don't want to soften these tones too much, because I want to make sure that I know that I've taken the time to sketch this out, and that I want to know that these are all sort of the same size. And so I soften them as I go. So this is kind of layer 2 here, which then I can sort of break down the form, and then I'll even do a third layer to soften them a bit more, and then go over with the fine detail. And that means then with my transparent sort of paint, that all those layers show through, and it really helps create that softness, or that appearance of softness.
reminder. Activity. This is a reminder. Activity.
Alexa, stop. So apologies, there was no sound in the first part of this video. I had a technical issue, being that I needed to charge the device that I plugged the microphone in instead of the microphone. So this is the 12 tones that I use. So I use a Panadol pack for my palette, because it keeps a small amount of paint in, and it's much easier to keep the acrylics wet without them drying out. So I just spray water on them, and there's a bit of slow drying medium in there in the mix too, and every hour or two I dip my brush in some water and give them a bit of a mix around to freshen them up. So obviously I don't need the darker tones. I actually haven't really used the white either, so when you're doing things that are further away or in a painting, you want them to look further away, but it's the same in life too. If you look off to the horizon and you look at the land that's really far, the blacks are never really blacks and the brights are never really that bright. They're slightly muted. And so with the softer parts, I use the same principle, and that just makes sure that they're not too in your face, and they don't take over what I do want to come off the page. This central area, but especially the water drop, which is down here now. All right. So, like I said, I'm using that sort of. This is the 000 brush, which I actually switched back to. I was using the 3NO. This one's one of the. Is it one of the Neef ones? It is. It's one of the Neef ones. Taklon round brush. I like the Taklon brushes. They're pretty. What am I doing? They're pretty sturdy and they're pretty resilient. And as much as I sort of paint, fine detail, I'm a bit rough with the brushes. I do a lot of this. Circular motion that you can see. It helps really avoid any edges, which is in this section is my main focus by far. It's actually more important really than form and light. I mean, as long as you get the form and light roughly in here, because it's kind of your mind. making it up anyway, so I don't, you know, I'm not too fussed about that, really. But what I really don't want is any hard edges. I want all the blends to be nice and soft. So here what I'm doing is I use wet blending mostly. So you can see I put the light tone down and then I've put the darker tone on the brush and wet blending around the edge. And then I will sort of, I dry off my brush heaps. So every time I pull the brush down, I'm drying it on the piece of paper towel that I've got on my floating table here. And that just means then that I can just pick up the tiniest fraction of paint. So I like a really dry brush, and you can tell if I go after the wet blend, then I'll pick up some of that and then I'll just dry blend into the work that's already there. But with the tones, really, I mean, you got to be really careful with the tones, because I mix 12 tones, but obviously there's not just 12 tones on the piece, and the image that you see here is so complex. If every time there's a tonal shift on here, you switch up to the next tone in your palette, you're going to run out of road, and you're going to use two dark tones in this light area, and then you're not going to have any movement anywhere to go when you actually get to the dark section. So be really careful about shifting up or down tones, and that's why I blend. But what I'll also do, so you'll see here that I put the darker tone in the middle to separate these two details here, but then what I'll actually do is pick a lighter tone and just go over that just a little bit more, so you can tell that it's still different, but I've just reduced that tone a little bit. I didn't want to go a full tone shift. It would have been too strong a contrast for the softness of the area that I'm doing, because like if I do 12 tones, if I'm doing 12 tones, don't forget that every time I put a tone down, it's not actually that tone, because I'm layering and my paints have slow drying medium and thinning medium in them, and so it's actually showing a lot of the tone from underneath. And so if I put down like my third tone, but it goes on top of a tone 5, then that tone's probably going to be closer to a tone 4 by the time it dries. And that's where acrylics can be a bit confusing, because when they're wet, you don't see the layers through. You get the light reflecting off the wetness of the paint, and you don't see the layers underneath quite as much. But then when it dries, and that's why people often, describe acrylics as sort of, they can be muddy, because you think you're getting a really vibrant tone. And that's one of the reasons that I use Winsor & Newton paints, because they have the least shift in tone as they dry, and that's to do with the medium that they use. Most acrylics use medium which is white when it's wet, and so it looks vibrant and it looks bright, and then it dries clear, and so it's a totally different shift. So we're going to do the same here. We've got this differentiation between these two lumps here, but obviously as it's a blurry section, it wouldn't be natural if that dark tone came all the way in between. So what I'm going to do is, what I tend to do is put down the tone which is the most common tone in that area. So for this, I didn't want to put down the lightest tone in the middle, would have been way too hard to blend in. I find that sort of 2 tones over either way will blend into, and even with a bit of dry blending, will blend into a background, maybe a third tone, but if you go too far, it ends up showing the dark tone underneath in the texture of the canvas where it hasn't filled in fully. So then what I can do is come back with the brighter tone and put that in the middle. And don't forget so that was my third tone from white, so white, off-white, and then this tone. And I'm going to put that down and just soften the edges, but as that dries, that's going to show through those other tones underneath, so it's not going to be too bright, which is great because it's a bit of a nondescript feature. And sometimes even if I'm with my block down tones, if there's too much contrast in there, I'll just get a tone and go over the whole thing, and then pick up a dark tone to wet blend this edge. Dry off the brush so that it's dry blending into the tone. If I don't dry on the brush, I'm going to smear so much paint over this side that I'll undo this dark section that I've done. Alright, and then I'm going to put that dark tone back in. And that just means then that, same as I was talking about before, it's nowhere near as dark, nowhere near as contrasted. And it is much softer, which is what we're looking for. Basically up here, we want to convey detail with the least amount of tonal shift possible, really. I guess that's the goal. You want it to be soft, look soft, because this is the supporting part of the work, right? And so obviously the light is coming from the left here, and so I make sure that on the right the transition is a lot more gradual and a lot softer, and then on the left where the light is hitting it, it's certainly not going to be a sharp transition, so I've put that lighter tone down. It's not quite the brightest tone. I'm going to do the same when I come back. I'm just going to fill in those spots, but we'll go over that. Didn't quite. You can see that section there where I tried going over with too bright a tone, whereas pick up slightly darker tone, and it got rid of that undertone underneath nicely. So pick up a bit of a darker tone, dry off the brush, and then with a darker tone on the brush, and you just pick up a little bit of that paint that's on the canvas. And just go along all those edges and just mess them up. Beautiful. And now I'll pick up the lighter tone. And when I pick up the lighter tone, I am conscious that with these bumps, there is that ridge between the sort of base of the bump. And I certainly don't want to put down a darker tone for that, because that's just going to, again, create too much contrast. So instead all we're going to do is put down the light tone, but just leave a gap where that ridge would be, and blend off this right edge. That's looking alright. Yeah, so now you can see, so we've got the light coming from left to right, and out of my tones here. So let's bring my reference image up. So actually in the reference image, it does show that the left-hand side is the brightest, but I do not want to use the white. I don't really want to draw focus over here. That's not where I want the focus to be. So I'm going to use the white on these highlights here. So this is still going to be a dark section, but I really want to increase contrast. This is the focal point here in the middle, right? So I'm not going to use whites over there, even though it looks like white. So all my highlights on this left-hand edge are the off-white at the most, and often they're an off-white with a slightly darker tone underneath. So it even, that's how you create that complexity in there, because if you see that complexity which is on that section, that's not each individual tone, that's layers and wet blends and softening, because I'm only working with 12 tones and only really want to use these tones over here, because if I've used that tone for this detail in here, then by the time I come to this ridge, I'm going to need that tone or that tone. And by the time I come over here and want to do these dark bits, I'm already starting here, and that doesn't give me much room to move. Ideally, I don't want to use the black very sparingly. Now I've shifted away from the black background, because really what I want is a touch of black in the water droplet, because I'm going to have absolute white and absolute black in the water droplet. That might be the only place in the whole work. Might get some black down here, but that creates the most amount of contrast. And then I've got the ability to create a glassy effect here, whereas if I've created too much contrast here, the water droplet's going to look no different to the urchin. So that's kind of the plan. So I have just started to introduce white here. I don't know if you can see that tone just lift here. This where I've stopped, this is going to be where I shift to the warmer paints. So this is my cooler range. So cooler range is going to be all the way around the outside. Maybe across the bottom edge, I haven't decided yet, but certainly the soft focus. In fact, I probably will do, I'll probably do the edge with the warmer tone. So this is where I'm going to shift to the warmer tones of paints. It's a very subtle shift, but it does make a difference to me, probably. I don't know if anybody else notices it. But this white is on top of, I've never put that white on top of white again. So even though I've used the white, like I said, don't make the mistake that it is white. It's white on top of darker tones. So I've still plenty of scope to make brighter tones here. And that's just, I just do that by feeling, like it's kind of a bit of a, I don't know, not a mathematical assessment as you go, but you really are judging each tone and judging what it's been laid over, judging what you're blending it with. I find when I'm blending that if that's the highlight and I want to blend that in, the best tone to blend is probably 2 tones over. If I blend it with that tone, I'm not making much progress, because I've got to blend that tone with that tone. But if that's the highlight, that's the dark, that's a good tone to blend with, and then I can just dry blend into that tone. It's very, once you start getting towards the darker tones, I wouldn't wet blend that one with that one. There'd be no control. You'd have smears and smudges in there, and it just wouldn't look that natural. So let's see if I can pick a bit where I'll show you. So this will be tone 3, because we're over here now, so I might put a bit of tone 2 on top of that just to lift it. I don't want to go too dark. So that was tone 3, and I'm going to pick up tone 5, and we'll put tone 5 around the edge and dry off my brush, and then with the brush just lift up both tones and just kind of work them into each other. They're nice and wet. Dry off the brush again and just keep softening. So now that central bit is done. Now I can go around, create a bit more of a border with tone 5, and just pick up a bit more of that tone 3 there. That's better. Alright, and then we've got tone 6 around it, so we'll just do a bit of tone 6 around here, because this area is lighter. There, 6 is mixed in nicely, and because that outside is tone 5, this side is a touch darker, so I can easily mix in tone 7, because that's just the 2 tones, so these 2 should blend nicely again. I'm actually going to pick up, it's not quite tone 7, so dry brush, I'm going to pick up a bit of that tone 6 and just really work that, just to pick up a bit of that lighter paint. There you go, and that's just created a darker side off to the left, but much more subtle than a total tonal shift. And so I'm going to unplug the microphone again and just work a bit longer, and then I'll probably just do a cut too. I mean, I've only got this section left to work. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it.